Welcome to the Takeoff Podcast, the go-to construction podcast for construction professionals seeking inspiration, education, or motivation for the next steps in their career. Each Monday, you'll be joined by me, Mick Donaghy, Managing Director of Gedon Executive Recruitment and a respected name from the industry. A construction leader, a business owner, or someone in the thick of the action. The whole premise of this podcast is for you to get something from it. An idea, a connection, a mentor, whatever it is, I hope you get it. And I hope you enjoy the show. Without further ado, let's get into it. Hi guys, welcome back to the Takeoff Podcast. Today on the podcast, I'm thrilled to be joined by Neil Watson. Originally from Durban, South Africa, Neil is currently the Director of Savills, Australia and New Zealand. Neil has a unique blend of quantity surveying and project management experience for both consultancies and contractors, bringing a unique perspective of both project delivery and commercial viability to the table. With an incredible track record of progression and development throughout his career, Neil has advanced his way through a range of different roles, including quantity surveying, assistant project management, senior project management, project delivery, associate director, and now director. With over 10 years experience working with one of the largest and most respected global consultancy businesses, I'm excited to talk to Neil today about his career and learnings along the way. Neil, thank you for joining me and being on the Takeoff Podcast. Do you mind giving us a little bit of an introduction to who you are, what you do? I never feel like I can do it proper justice.
Thanks, Mick. Great to be on the show. Followed a lot of the podcasts over the last couple of years. So yeah, bit of my background, one of the directors within the project management division at Savills. As you kind of highlighted, sort of come through the different ranks, got a construction management background and obviously from South Africa and have been in Australia circa 15 years.
Excellent. Well, one of the things that I spoke about in the introduction there, Neil, was you've got this real linear, steady progression throughout your career. And that's something that I feel like we don't talk about enough. And that's something I'm really keen to talk about, later in the show today. But sort of going back then, director now today, take me back to the very first makings of Neil in the construction sector. What made you want to get into construction as a career?
It's an interesting one. Construction was never sort of my first choice. I was always actually inclined to choose something that was more sports orientated or sports aligned, whether it was sports management or something along those lines. And I think that's just growing up in South Africa, sports is, a big passion over there. Obviously rugby, golf, cricket, we pretty fanatical. The construction side of things, where that sort of piqued my interest was really around the property aspects. And then naturally I was interested in the building side around how it all, kind of comes together. We had to do some work experience when I was in high school, and that was for, I think it was a week or 2 week period. I don't remember exactly how long, but essentially went off, did a couple of weeks for my uncle's civil engineering business at the time, and he mainly looked after landfills, and essentially spent 2 weeks out there just, looking around, see what's going on, kind of getting a feel for things. From that point on, went and did just some basic work with a small residential builder, at the same time looking to go and study whether it was civil engineering or a construction degree. I leaned towards more the construction degree, but really dipped my toe with the small residential builder at the time. So that's kind of how I got into exploring the construction or property industry at that stage.
So I've worked with a lot of South African people over the years. I feel like from a demographic, nearly every construction company is going to have Irish, and we're definitely going to have South Africans. It just feels like it gets right. There's such a respect for professionals coming from South Africa into Australia or New Zealand or anywhere, even Ireland. What is it? Why do you think that is? Are the degree courses that you do in South Africa, are they quite sort of rigorous? Tell me a little bit more about the educational aspect and what you would have went through there studying that construction degree course.
Yeah, look, I think the appeal with studying some level of construction or quantity surveying qualification in South Africa is probably a few things. One is it's like anything kind of around the world, it's a bit of a booming industry, and there's always generally work involved. It's pretty good paying jobs over there. But probably the big aspect is once you have that qualification, you get exposure to potentially traveling around the world and going to work in places like Ireland or England or Australia, New Zealand, Canada, wherever it may take you. So that's the biggest sort of appeal to me with one of those qualifications. The other thing there with what the qualification involves is, typically you do a construction focused base course or base subjects that kind of carry you through, year 1, 2, and 3. At the same time, you do a cost or a quantity surveying based subject that takes you through, 1, 2, and 3 also. And then there's supplementary subjects that go with it. That's not to say it's like that at every uni or TAFE or anything like that, but there's different aspects or differences between a university and I went to Durban University of Technology, where it's a bit more practical based, and they even make you go and do 6 months prac work on site with a builder or with a quantity surveyor to get that exposure to what it's going to be like when you qualify. But definitely the core subjects there were the construction side plus the QS side. And that's kind of what you take out of it from when you qualify at the end of the day. And you can obviously branch off and specialize in either quantity surveying or construction management.
What route did you decide to go down then?
Well, I pretty much finished up and I was definitely more aligned with the construction management side of things. I would definitely say majority of the people I was studying with at the time actually preferred quantity surveying. We were definitely on the minority side. So that was my focus. I had an interest in being on site, seeing things kind of evolve or be built in front of me. And then when I got to Australia, I ended up doing a postgrad in project management for a couple of years when I was here. And there's various reasons for why I ended up doing that.
Talk to me about, when you finished your degree course then, what was your first job coming out of university?
So I was quite fortunate enough. When I was at university, I actually applied to try and get some bursaries or scholarships for companies to essentially help me fund my studies at the time. And at that stage, I was actually doing a qualification which was called property development. And a lot of the builders I'd spoken to at the time recommended I change and go to Durban University of Technology. And the reason for that was, the more practical aspect. After my first year, I was lucky enough to get a bursary through one of the companies I worked for in South Africa, which was a tier 1 builder, Stefanuti Stocks at that stage. And essentially my first job was working for them once I'd qualified. And I spent a few years with them in Durban and in South Africa at that stage.
I quite often will see, the Stefanuti Stocks, on people's CVs. So, maybe given a bit of context, would they be like a Lend-Lease or like a John Holland or someone like that, if you were sort of looking at it in Australian terms?
Yes, definitely definitely in that tier 1 space, but not just in buildings. They do a lot of infrastructure, bridges, gas, mines, kind of full array of services and very specialized in what they do. I was fortunate enough to branch off into the building or property space with them, but they've got a wide array of specialist services that they focus on and very much tier 1 builder in the South African landscape.
Can you remember the first project that you worked on coming out of university, as a green grad?
Yeah, I can. It was a shopping center expansion at the time, very much thrown in the deep end, big learning curves. You're a small fish in a big pond, so to speak, but can remember like it was yesterday. So a lot of learnings taken from that project, definitely.
And did you find that those first few years, they kind of shaped you, moving forward then, working for a contractor maybe has helped you maybe moving into the consultancy space?
Yeah, definitely. Consultancy was never my first choice. It's just something that kind of evolved or happened. I wouldn't say by accident, but it was just the situation that presented itself at the time. But definitely the learnings I got from working with that tier one contractor at that stage was massive. I mean, those were the building blocks or foundations of everything I know today. Extremely grateful for what I went through. And, I love being on site. I love every day was a challenge, and seeing things get built literally in front of you, it was something to be proud of when you finished. But it's important of what I learned from, 7+ years working with contractors at that stage to doing consultancy, because a lot of that is transferable. But at the same time, I understand what builders and contractors are going through, just the language or some of the obstacles. It's all things you can appreciate having lived and breathed the same steps with them, what they go through.
I was speaking to someone recently, and, I find that nowadays people want to accelerate through their career really, really quickly. They don't want to do the hard yards of working as an engineer or on site for 5, 6, 7 years to build their experience. I remember when I spoke to Alison Miriam, who was ex Roberts Co, and I think she told me she worked like as a quantity surveyor or something along that lines for like 10 years before moving anywhere into any sort of leadership roles. So were those first, say, 5 to 10 years of your career, were they quite challenging? Because I find that nowadays when people see the challenge and the rigor and the toughness, they want to either bail or they'll want another easier option. So of course that's not everyone, but seeing it more and more as time goes on.
I mean, back then it was a little bit different for me. I wasn't necessarily focused on the promotion or the title or trying to just get to the next step. All I was keen to do in my early years was learn. I was just keen to be someone that could hold a conversation with someone else, standing on site or in a meeting room or whatever it may be. My focus was never on, I need to progress from being essentially I started off as like a laborer / delivery driver. I never went, I've got to get to that step in the next 12 months. And it's not because I wasn't driven. It was just purely based on my focus was trying to learn as much as I could, because theory and university books and things like that only take you so far. It's the practical side that, potentially in the 6 months that I did spend on site, I learned more there, respectfully, than I did kind of at uni to an extent. So a lot of my learnings were just trying to grow my experience and understanding of what's going on. And that was kind of some of those first steps that I went through, not trying to focus on being a site manager or a contracts manager or anything like that.
What was the main reason then for moving to Australia? I know obviously there's a lot of sort of political disruption maybe during that time, or economical disruption. Was that sort of the sort of context for you as well, Neil?
Changing from contractor side to
going from South Africa to Australia.
So my partner or wife at that stage, she was Australian or South African by birth, but she wanted to move back home to Australia. So essentially I decided to pack my bags at that stage and give it a crack. And I had nothing, we had nothing to lose. We had no kids. We had no liabilities or anything like that. It's obviously a massive challenge or big step forward to try and move countries across the other end of the world.
Yeah.
So that was our progression from packing up and moving to Australia in early 2011, just after the 2010 floods. And we just came here and tried to make a go of it. I fell into the consultancy side of things, not because that was what I wanted to progress down. It was the challenge that was kind of put in front of me at that stage when we moved over, because it was post GFC. There wasn't a lot of work around at that stage. I'd probably circulated my CVs to a few builders at, what I knew of, at least, plus to some recruiters. And that was a challenge in itself at that stage, because the hard part for me was the local experience aspect, the South African qualification. All these things were an obstacle that made it difficult to try and find a job, plus the fact that there was not much work around at that stage. Probably one of the best bits of advice I got at that point in time, because I was never about giving up or anything like that. And I was quite fortunate to find something fairly quickly. But one of the best bits of advice I got at that stage from a recruiter was to try and just offer to do some work experience, because all that gave me at that point in time was a foot in the door, a chance to just, prove what I can do, demonstrate what I'm about, who I am as a person. And that's what I ended up getting a crack at. A company locally gave me an opportunity to come and do, 3 months work experience. And I was actually as a quantity surveyor at the time, because I had the ability to go and measure plans. It wasn't a choice thing that I wanted to do QS. It was just to get something on my CV. So if I went and tried to find a job, in a year, 2 years, whatever time frame that might be, I had that local experience that is quite sought after here in Australia. Fortunately for me, midway or towards the end of my work experience, I actually got offered a permanent job, stayed on as a QS. Naturally, QS for me was not something that, I woke up every day to go, I want to go and do some quantity surveying. It was very much the site-based activities or seeing things get built in front of me. So I was fortunate that there was a project management division where I worked. It was fairly new. Project management for me was kind of a new concept in itself, and I'd asked to be transferred across. The reason it was new was quantity surveyors and architects are quite sought after, or, sit at the top of a pyramid, so to speak, in the South African context, and they almost act as like your traditional PM with a contract or client rep or things like that. Extremely well respected. So that's why the terminology around PM was a bit foreign to me at that stage. But that's really where I made my transition from the contractor side to consultancy. I haven't looked back since. It's very much something I enjoy, but it was just by chance that actually happened.
So one of the things I take from that, I love the fact that, you came to Australia and you were willing to maybe sacrifice a bit of ego or reputation, or, you feel, you're nearly like you're going back to the start of your career again when you come to Australia in some way. So what was that like, Neil, to say, I'm actually I'm offering my services here effectively for free just to get experience, because a lot of people nowadays would maybe take the high road and, want maybe to find the perfect role straight away. But that's an attitude that I endorse. I actively, discuss with people coming into Australia. So tell me a little bit more about that and what that was like.
Look, just my background and growing up, and being from South Africa, we're very much about hard work, putting the time and the yards in, and what you put in is what you're going to get out kind of scenario or saying. Very much did not have an ego about any of it. I just saw it as an opportunity. I saw it as an opening that, I was ecstatic, because it was my opportunity to experience what it's like working in another country and in Australia, and could not be happy at that stage. I was fortunate to have a lot of support from my wife at that point in time. I didn't see it as anything else besides just, you've got this opportunity to go and springboard your career or work life in another country and in Australia and take it with both arms, so to speak.
It's to be honest, it's kind of a real like South African mentality. I remember I was in New Zealand and a guy constantly used to ring me from South Africa all the time, and it is really hard to, like, for me, I can't really place people unless they've got local experience, like, quite often, because if a company's gonna pay me, usually they're paying me for local knowledge and experience. I try to give this guy as much advice as possible. I said, listen, the best thing that you can do is actually fly here and meet people. And so this was in Auckland, and he walked around for a week, right? And he just walked up to these builders, rapped the doors, and introduced himself. And he was super presentable, really lovely guy, great experience. He left. He had a flight booked at the end of the week. He left with something like 8 offers straight away, because he was willing to, go with the the approach of, I'm not even going to ask for an interview. I'm just going to wrap the door with my CV, introduce myself to the GM, and just say, I'm here if you need me. And it's so impressive when you see that type of attitude. So I wish we had a little bit more of that. But sort of maybe looking at the transition then from working in South Africa to Australia, and then going from contractor to consultancy, what were the main differences there for you and learnings at that time?
I mean, just some of the challenges were, I mean, building's building, but there are some slight differences around how we build things in South Africa versus how things are built in Australia. Obviously, time and efficiency is a big thing over here, machinery, plant focus, whereas in South Africa, you know, respectfully, labor is a lot cheaper. There's a lot more people actively on site, and that's just because it was a low-cost option to get the job done. So probably the big thing there was more just how things are done slightly differently over here. Definitely terminology, abbreviations, acronyms, all of that kind of comes with the territory of learning what does that acronym mean or what does that mean. The other side of things is building your network. The biggest challenge for me is probably trying to establish some form of network. I obviously wasn't fortunate enough to go to school here or have any friends or anything like that I could reach out to or connect with. I pretty much had to start from rock bottom, start from scratch. And it's all about putting yourself out there, just being open-minded, go and meet different people, and obviously, you know, have the right personality to go and do all those things and be respectful and just have a go with trying to grow who you know and what you know. And that was probably the hardest thing, was really growing that base of consultants, builders, whatever it may be, clients. Because you are starting from scratch. You sort of really on the back foot when you move over. And depending on the age, obviously the younger you are, the easier it is. But the older you are, it can be more difficult because you've got your own personal challenges in life with family, things like that, depending on what circumstance you are in life.
How old were you at this point in time when you made that move, Neil?
I would have been 26 when
26.
we moved over. And I know this sounds crazy, but we really only came over with pretty much a suitcase and a couple boxes. And that was it. We didn't have, we weren't fortunate enough to, say, sell a property over there, move over, buy something else. We kind of started from scratch. Everything you save, I know you've obviously been here for a while and experienced what it's like, but everything you save, you're kind of using that money to buy a fridge or a TV, until you get to a point where you can actually look at other things or holidays, whatever it may be. So
takes time. When I emigrated, I was 26. When I moved to Australia, I was 29, or 28, I think. But yeah, there's so many challenges. I think that point about not knowing anyone's hard. And I mean, if I can imagine what Brisbane would have been like around that time, did you say 2011? Around about
2011.
2011, I moved in 2019 and I thought it was very quiet and, it was a bit, I didn't know how to sort of get myself ingrained in the city. So I can imagine what it was like in 2011. I mean, what did you have to do to sort of build that network? You mentioned about putting yourself out there, but was it more like going to an event or trying to get to a networking session? Like what was it specifically that you had to do?
I mean, the whole networking or social events wasn't, to me at that stage, wasn't a massive thing. Really, all it was about at that point was just getting to know some of the consultants or clients, or even just the people you worked with, getting to know them. They would then potentially introduce you to someone else. You'd go for a coffee or a lunch, whatever it may be. And slowly you'd branch out and meet new people. It could have been, hey, do you have a recommendation for a consultant that does X, Y, and Z? And they'd put you in touch with that person and kind of grew from there. Of course, opportunities came up with meeting clients or consultants in a social environment. I was trying to jump at that as often as I could. But at the same time, I got to the point where, I also started to have a young family. Challenges like that became hard, but it's just having an open mind to go and meet new people. I know it's difficult to just start a conversation from scratch or walk into a room and have a conversation with a complete stranger. To an extent, a lot of people are in the same or similar situation, and you just be yourself and just ask questions and get to know someone on a personal level. It all helps at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's how we met each other. It was
Correct.
Through a mutual connection, Steve, and that's how you meet people. And I mean, it does take time, and not having that, maybe putting too much pressure on yourself to go to all these events and stuff like that. Quite often that going to an event and networking event, I don't know if I've ever had met someone who I've become close to at one of those things. It might be useful to some extent, but quite often it's about, as you said, an introduction here or getting invited along and having that sort of organic conversation. It just feels a lot more natural. How long did it feel like it took you to build a good network in Brisbane?
Like conservatively, I would say maybe 7 years. But that's at the point where you can pick up the phone and potentially phone a few different people, whether it's for advice or, hey, do you know this person and can you do an introduction? And obviously a lot of that comes with confidence. But if I had to estimate, I'd say maybe 7 years. It probably took.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I think it obviously depends a lot on circumstances, but that's a good sort of I guess number. And so moving on to, you worked in a few different roles, working your way up through the industry. So moving from QS to assistant PM to PM to senior PM, it's such a real, it's nearly like I guess the progressions of a pyramid. Talk to me about that, like what you were doing, at that time to be going and having these sort of consistent promotions in your career, Neil.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've actually been asked that question a few times, to be honest, and it is your typical graph, the straight line going in a consistent angle from bottom to top. Look, I think it's just a combination of a few things. I've been fortunate enough to work with some really nice people and experienced people over the years that have really helped me and guided me or shaped me in the trajectory I'm sort of heading towards. Again, like career aspirations and targets. Yeah, as you get older, those things, become a little bit more of a focus of next steps and working your way towards something else. But a lot of the time, hard work, hours spent comes into play with all of that, as well as the leadership or mentorship that you get from others that you work with. And I've been fortunate enough to demonstrate my ability or what I can do over the years, and the trust that's been put in me is obviously reflective of my general progression along those different milestones.
So it wasn't something that you were always chasing. It was more just a matter of doing the work, making sure that you were doing quality work, and those sort of opportunities were presenting themselves.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just the way I've been brought up or my personality, but yes, the next step is always something in the back of your mind. But I always believed in, if I worked hard enough, if I demonstrated what I can do, if I put in the efforts, the recognition will come with that. If it takes a year or if it takes 5 years, well, that's just how long it takes. There's smarter people, more experienced people out there than me. And if they believe that that's how long it takes, then, so be it. I was never one to kind of voice my concerns around things like that. It was more just letting my actions speak for itself.
So you mentioned there that you moved to Brisbane 2011. How have you seen the industry and the city change, over the last 15 years?
Yep. Look, good question. I mean, when I first got to Brisbane, It definitely felt like this massive city to me when you move over from South Africa, or where I was from at that stage, and I felt completely lost
Yeah.
walking around through all these buildings. Look, it's definitely changed. There's been new developments happening, or different precincts occurring around the city. Obviously, you got Queen's Wharf, you got Howard Smith Wharves, all of that. The Olympics is coming. So it's definitely evolved, which has been really positive, and it's nice to kind of see that unfold. And even if you look back through some old photos, you look at the change over the years, it's very noticeable as to what's kind of transpired here, circa 15 years or so since I came over.
Even since 2019, when I first moved to Brisbane, the change it's black and white in many ways. There's new bridges, there's new casinos, there's hotels, there's expansion of Hartsmith Wharves, there's infrastructure projects. It's such a vibrant and booming city. I guess, what Savills, where you're currently a director, what type of, I guess, projects would you typically engage with then, Neil?
Look, just on a personal level, really kind of play in all different spaces besides anything that's heavy infrastructure or defense orientated. But, Queensland's a bit of a smaller market, if you want to call it that. So you have to be adaptable or flexible to doing different things. But I also see it as an opportunity to experience different things, as opposed to just staying in your lane and doing one thing the whole time. So very much from a project perspective or sector perspective, not overly phased, but generally anything that's retail, commercial, or life science focused is kind of what piques my interest.
That life science is something that I've been doing a lot of work with in the European market recently, and life sciences, data centers, digital infrastructure, where do you see, I guess, that evolution? What does that look like, in that type of space in life sciences and those more sort of technical based projects? How do you see those evolve over the next 4 or 5 years?
Look, I think it's something that's definitely growing, definitely expanding in Australia. There's a little bit of a education piece that's kind of got to evolve over the years with that compared to overseas. But the way things are going with technology and AI and advancements in a multitude of things, it's definitely a space that, can grow phenomenally over the years, where there's no limit to how far it can kind of go, really.
Do you think we're going to see much disruption in with AI and construction over the next, I don't know, 5-10 years? Someone told me about 2 days ago that recruiters are just going to get wiped out, so I was pretty nervous about that, And then I tested something yesterday. So we use like a VoIP system, which is like a call system, and so you can literally hire these assistants to take calls, if you're offline.
Yep.
And you can choose their accent. You can give them the context of what you want, give them the name, I was like, and then I created this woman called Sally from Southeast Queensland, and it's maybe 50% there. I wouldn't be confident enough to actually use it yet, but it's pretty terrifying to think of what's going to happen in the next 10 years or so. So how do you think AI is going to maybe disrupt construction or change construction?
Yeah, look, I know this question comes up quite often, and I know you guys have spoken about it quite often as well. It's a hard one. Like, crystal ball wise, you'd love to say, well, that evolution might replace these roles, but it's not going to replace these certain roles. I guess the jury's out there that we probably just don't know the full extent of it all. I definitely see it more of an opportunity than anything, especially with what we do for work. If there's ways to make us more efficient, make tasks easier, be able to use our time so we can spend it in, elsewhere in different things and have more of an impact, I'm all for it at the end of the day, if it's going to help take the burden off of those minor tasks that we have to do in our day to day.
I think construction is so slow to change as well. It's an industry that, I guess, it's so people orientated. I quite often say that I'm recruiting personality quite often, recruiting character, personality, ambition. That's what most people are looking to hire. The technical aspect can always be taught. I feel like in construction, if we can integrate a lot of efficiencies in terms of the systems and processes, I think it would maybe help us, I guess get more productive, get better at what we do, and ultimately maybe advance the industry forward, Maybe, sort of moving on in terms of the greater opportunity then within the Brisbane market. How do you see that over the next 5 to 10 years, obviously with the Olympics coming? What do you see on the horizon?
Look, obviously massive opportunity for Southeast Queensland and Queensland in general and Australia. The Olympics is a global sport that's showcased around the world. It's a massive opportunity to be involved with something like that. So definitely the next 7 or so years is going to be busy. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be interesting, all at the same time. And obviously the industry as a whole faces its own unique challenges. We're trying to get all that done by 2032, which has all been pretty well publicized by different people over the last few months, regarding all of that.
And obviously, a big part of that is going to be people doing the work, how we're going to fulfill a lot of these projects, because it's not just the Olympics, it's what's happened in healthcare and infrastructure and energy, so it's all seems to have just happened at once, for Southeast Queensland. So, I guess just maybe rounding up the show then, Neil, for someone like yourself, maybe if you could give advice to who you were when you were 25 years old as a guy based in Durban, South Africa, making that move to Australia, what advice would you give him?
I mean, depends on stage in life or what person he's going on. But if I could give any advice, it's just have an open mind. Don't be afraid to put in, the efforts, the hard work. I kind of always viewed the move, and even when I've spoken to some colleagues or friends that have done the same move, across from South Africa to Australia or UK to Australia, it's a little bit of one step backwards, 2 steps forward. It's just a foot in the door or an opportunity, and just take it with both hands and make the most of it, and essentially let your actions speak for themselves. If you work hard enough and do the things you say you're going to do, generally recognition or advancement will come with it. But don't be afraid to have a go and have an open mind to doing anything, because you are in a different country. You are starting from a certain point in life or a work career, whatever it may be. And it's only a stepping stone to something greater at the end of the day. And that's kind of the way I sort of looked at it. Even if I look back now over the years, that was probably true now, but at that point in time, it's probably not something you were thinking about going, oh, it's just an immediate stepping stone to the next best thing. Just see it as an opportunity to learn about your new environment you're in, and just give it your best.
No, I love that. What's one thing that you would like to change about the construction industry in Australia? Is there anything specific that you would like to maybe see development on, improvement on?
I'm all about trying to do things differently or in a unique way, or, wake up every day, try and find something that's going to be interesting. I don't know if there's one specific thing I'd want to change. I think just generally as a whole, I think probably some of the hurdles or obstacles we're going to go through, over the immediate or medium future with the Olympics on the horizon, it creates opportunity to do things differently or explore methods of construction or ways of doing things in a completely different way. And it's these sorts of situations that kind of grow or foster that environment. It's not something I want to change, but I'm hopeful that over the next few years, there's going to be something new that comes on the horizon, which is exciting, not just for Australia as a whole, but also internationally. Entrepreneurs, whatever it may be, that come out with something different.
I love that. I think in terms of, we find that there's a lot of people in the industry that make that move from one country to another, or make that move from, different discipline from QS to project, or want to make that move from QS to like project management. So having done that at a period in your career as well, a lot of the listeners of this podcast come from that sort of QS background. Is there anything that you would maybe advise them to maybe look at or try and get exposure to, or maybe consider in their career?
Look, just generally, if there's any course that offers some level of practical experience, I definitely learned a heap doing that. But, naturally, if the qualification or course you're studying has some core fundamentals that the industry relies upon, I think that's important. I think if the qualification gives you the opportunity to travel, even better, because you can go and use those skills anywhere in the world. But definitely learning firsthand around what goes on in the actual workplace versus what happens in a textbook or on a screen, they don't always align, and you definitely learn more from that. So if there's an opportunity to have that experience with the practical side of things, it's definitely beneficial.
You might have a lot of QSs now reaching out to you, looking for work experience opportunities in project management. So, I mean, if there is anyone out there that might want to, pick your brain for advice or maybe have a coffee with you, what's the best way to get in contact? Is it via LinkedIn?
Yeah, look, more than happy to answer questions or, share a bit more about my journey or story. Because I get it, I appreciate it. I walk those steps myself. So LinkedIn, happy to reach out and connect, and obviously happy to catch up or respond to any questions anyone might have.
Neil, thank you so much for being on the Takeoff podcast. I love hearing about your story, and I'm excited to see what else you do in your career. So thank you very much for being part of the show.
No, thank you, Mick. Really appreciate it, and keep up the good work with the podcast. It will definitely connect or resonate with others out there. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Before you go today, guys, I'm just going to ask you to do one thing. Can you please go to Apple right now or Spotify right now and just give us those 5 stars? Hit that 5-star button. It makes such a difference you wouldn't believe. The whole idea of this show is to inspire, educate, and motivate our listeners. And we only do that if we're getting the best guests. The best guests want to see data. They want to see information. They want to see how many listeners that we get. And so all of this stuff is really, really important. So if you can just literally go and do that today, if you enjoy the show, just go and hit that 5-star button. It makes such a difference. I hope you've enjoyed the show. We're going to continue to push this out there every Monday. So if you can, hit that 5-star button. And if you can't, even share it with a friend. Go on to WhatsApp, flick it on to your crew. Guys, thank you so much for listening. On to next week.